She was the fourth generation in her family to step forward and serve in the Canadian Armed Forces. But still, Kelly Thompson encountered much she didn't expect during her military career. And as she recounts in her new memoir, Girls Need Not Apply, Field Notes from the Forces, that included conflict with both men and women in a male-dominated culture. And it brings Kelly Thompson to our studio tonight. So nice to meet you.
Thanks for having me.
Really enjoyed the book a lot, so I'm anxious to have this conversation. How old were you when you first decided you wanted to get into the Canadian Forces?
I joke I'm still not sure I decided, in that it just seemed like a thing that happened. I was 18 and 9/11 happened, and I was skipping a year of high school. So I was graduating a year earlier than my friends. So I was 18 and 9/11 prompted it, but also a free education.
Well, and it was a bit of the family business, and I'm going to read an excerpt from the book that indicates that. Here we go. Although neither Dad nor Grandpa T could ever say the words post-traumatic stress disorder, both men carried the weight of its symptoms as though they'd gained 100 pounds, the mental conditions burden impossible for family and colleagues to ignore. My anxiety was bred into me. Dad's was a product of military experience, and en route to basic training, I wondered if the war I'd inevitably be facing would crack me in half like it had to the men of my family. Given that you had all of that weighing on you, or certainly as an example to you, it kind of prompts the question doubly. Why do this?
I think there are a lot of friends I know, we call them military brats, who we grew up with in the military environment. It really becomes what you know, and there's a lot of comfort in that. And I really think because a lot of us grow up on military bases, you see that pride and that honor in serving something bigger than yourself. I think that's a really big part of it. Without getting kind of corny and saying it's a calling, there is this part where I never thought I would join the military. And then this happened, and I thought, well, now I know why my dad goes to work every morning. Now I know why he's away from home for 6 months, for a year, what have you, so.
There's a line in your book saying, soldiers are designed for suffering. How so?
I don't know if we can ever ask anyone to go see some of the things our soldiers see and expect them to come home unchanged. I think we're lucky in Canada where there's an element where we're a bit removed from that kind of violence in a way. And so when we go overseas and we see people suffering, or for me often when I would see them come home and see them suffering, it's almost like a cross we bear in service to the country.
Let's talk a bit about some of the suffering you underwent, and you really do describe it in great detail in the book.
Thank you.
Talk about the first few days of basic training. What was that like?
A bit of an eye-opener. I definitely got to basic training expecting that it would be physically hard, and mentally hard. My dad had given me a bit of a warning. But definitely the frame of reference I had for what military life was going to be like was through the perspective of men in my family, no women. And so I didn't quite expect that there would be this added barrier of the sexism. So the first few days, I think I got in there thinking it was just going to be this game between me and the core staff, not as much of what a divisive experience it would be, and a uniting experience, but between my coworkers, my platoon mates.
But you certainly anticipated, you know, the grunt work, the puking, that all of that stuff, right?
So much puking. So many push-ups, so much puking.
Yes, so much puking.
Yeah.
But it was the rest of it you didn't anticipate.
Yes.
Okay. At what point does the feeling of really not belonging set in?
Pretty early on, we were a really small platoon, which wasn't common. So there's only about 20 of us when normally there's about 60 people in a platoon.
And where are you at this point?
We're in Saint-Jean, Quebec.
Okay.
That's where our basic training's done. And so we're far away from home. And I definitely had an inkling pretty early on because I stood out because I was really physically weak. I mean, I just could not keep up. So I already stood out for that. And then we would get into inspections and the core staff would be asking me, do you worry that everyone thinks you're weak? And does that concern you? Well, of course it concerns me. So it was sort of picking at that scab of insecurity and really highlighting it in a way that I hoped was to build me up, but was doing more breaking me down.
What's the ratio of men to women that you're training with?
At the time I joined, it was about 12%. And
female.
12% female. And now I think we're up to about 15%.
You get screamed at a lot.
So much.
What's that like?
I grew up in a house where no one yelled. We didn't yell at each other. So that was definitely instantly would make me quite anxious. But at the same time, that part I was a little more prepared for.
Well, the idea is to toughen you up, obviously.
Yes.
Did it do that?
Oh, without a doubt, just in not quite the way they expected.
Well, we'll get into that. Yeah. There seems to be very little room for imperfection in this unit, right?
Yes.
Even if you're a newbie. Why do you think that is?
I think we have to train our soldiers to a level of expertise and perfection because people's lives are at risk. So there's a lot of concentration on where your weapon is at all times. Even though they don't have bolts, we don't have ammunition, but making sure you know where it is, that it's locked up. And while some people were getting charged for maybe leaving a part out or forgetting where they had put it, that kind of thing, there's a lot to be said for, in war, that's someone's life on the line. Mm-hmm. So we train them because it's lives. It's not just paperwork every day.
It's definitely life and death, but they were concerned about more than just your gun. They were concerned at one point about your hygiene products, and there was a story there. You want to share that?
I think they weren't used to adjusting to women's needs in some cases.
Decoy razors, does that ring any bells?
Oh, my decoy razor, yes. So they were upset about, there was scum on my razor and they had it within an inch of my face and screaming at me, but that was the kind of thing that happened to everyone. But we would have instances where women, me in particular, you know, I got my period in the field and they didn't want to let me go do anything about it. Well, what am I supposed to do? I'm a grown woman and this is something that happens, and this is something that would also happen in war. So their argument was, well, if you're in war, you can't take care of it. Well, eventually something takes care of something, you know. So it was, sometimes I liked that, watching the staff squirm in those positions because they didn't quite know what to do either, and neither did we.
Having been through it now, though, do you agree that this is the right way to train people to become killers, which is ultimately your job?
Who am I to say in that way? Is it the way to raise leaders? That I don't know. I've learned more about being a leader since I left the military than I did while I was in, because the military wants a very specific kind of leadership, an A-type kind. I was told a million times I was not A-type enough. I think I can be kind and empathetic, and I can still lead effectively. Mm-hmm. I don't think it has to be a reflection of my femininity or of my chest size or of what I bring to the table other than being good at my job.
In hindsight, are you grateful for the experience?
Absolutely.
You are?
Yes.
How come?
I really learned what I was made of. I did make, despite, the book is a chronicle of the more negative experience, but I also had a lot of really beautiful experiences. I met people who I would trust with my life, and I really learned to trust my gut about what I felt comfortable with and what I didn't. And it really helped shape and hone my values as I got older about, there's a reason I still stand behind the military. Did the military and some people in it hurt me? Yes. But it also really made me who I am. I traveled, I got an education, and I left with experiences that I both cherish and made me analyze myself in a deeper way.
Who's your husband?
I'm still so smitten. We met when I was 18 years old in basic training, and I broke my leg, and he carried me for 3 kilometers.
There you go. So
it took me a very long time to make him date me. Years and years and years of persistence.
I think the point I was trying to make, though, is that, you know, you got more than just a few tough experiences out of this. You got a husband out of it, too. Yeah.
I found a keeper.
You found a keeper. That's a good way to put it.
Yeah.
Okay, let's do another excerpt from the book here. Sheldon, you want to bring this graphic up? Despite equality measures in place, most military females I met grudgingly accepted that sometimes we were unable to physically match the men because our bodies were designed differently. Women bring other stuff to the table. A woman in my pod said once, our pod had nodded in agreement but remained silent. What no one voiced was whether or not that stuff, those qualities that made women in the forces different but no less useful, would ever be as respected as one's ability to do push-ups. Take us through this. Did you presumably obviously thought you brought something to the table that was of use and value to the Canadian Forces. Were they unable to see it because you just couldn't do as many push-ups as the next guy?
I think because the very nature of war often has us prizing physicality. And I understand that, but war is changing. Technology is changing the way that we do business overseas and at home. And so I think a more inclusive military, a better representation of what our country is, which is diverse and rich in culture, in a variety of different cultures and backgrounds, if we learn to appreciate that a little bit more, then we wouldn't just have this image of what a military person is, which is a white man. And so I think, you know, I got to my courses and I did my training and I was the top student on almost every single one, and out of 100 people or so. Why couldn't that be the thing that's valued instead of the moment I come home, I'm asked who I slept with to get to the top?
Well, I'm going to get to more of that in a second, but to play that forward, the fact that you could ace those tests, what characteristics or values or talents do you think that reflected that you think ought to be higher prized by the military?
Empathy and compassion. So my human resources course, for an example, we dealt a lot with casualty admin, and we had female course staff, which wasn't super common. And both of these women, 2 majors, were getting really emotional in the book, talking about a soldier that they had helped accommodate in a different, who had a medical problem. And they both got emotional. And we were all so shocked, oh, there's female soldiers crying, because you tend to feel like you can't, because that's too much empathy, that's too much sadness. I think I have a line in the book where there's no room for emotion in a organization that makes it more moot. And yet, I also think that empathy, that compassion is what makes Canada have such a beautiful reputation around the world for the kind of soldiers that we are, because we do care at every place that we go. And I don't know if a single military person signs up not caring about that as a bigger picture.
Well, let's talk a bit about the sexism that you ran into. How long before, well, obviously this is a mixed situation, there's men and women there. Men are making comments about your figure. Mm-hmm. You knew that was going to happen. I presume you knew that was coming.
Sure.
Had you made a decision about how you intended to handle that?
No. I very much went in not at all expecting it. I think my parents did not raise me to believe that my gender was ever an impediment to anything, and so I never even quite literally considered it. I also think it was the time too. You know, this was before Me Too. This was before social media, really, and so I got there and didn't really have an understanding of what a woman's experience would be. So I went in really naive and therefore uncertain of how to push those barriers. You know, you're trying to fit in. I was also physically weak, so I didn't feel like the other women who were doing physically very well. I didn't feel like I had a lot of wiggle room for voicing extra concerns and putting extra light on myself.
And you didn't, right? You basically let those comments, you gave them a pass.
Gave
let
them a
it
pass
slide.
every time for almost a decade. Yeah.
So if you had it to do again, would you call that kind of behavior now?
Oh gosh, I hope so. But I don't know if I'd be strong enough to do it then. Sometimes I think it had to be the product of the whole experience that finally led me to leaving and recognizing how wrong it was.
At one point, I think you're in Kingston, you're 22 years old, you're the only woman, and you're kind of in charge. Have I got this right?
I'm not the only woman, but I'm one of very few.
One of very few.
I'm the only person in my 20s. Everyone's 30 years older than me. Yeah.
So how did that work out exactly?
It's kind of the nature of how it works when you go through officer training. You usually graduate and then you're instantly posted in charge of a platoon. So usually you have a really great mentor who helps sort of lead you into understanding what it is to be a leader, not just how to do your job. And I didn't have that, unfortunately.
Who was your first boss?
Female officer, close to retirement age, so she would have joined at a very different time. So I was always cognizant of the fact that she joined in the 70s when things were especially not easy for women. But she could have used that experience to support me, and instead it constantly felt like I was being broken down.
Easier then to work for a man than for a woman in the military, in your experience?
No, I think it's all personality based. I do think our officers, we very much expect, like I said, that A-type personality as far as leaders go. And so I think we have a negative connotation of what it means to be a tough, persistent woman than we do for a man.
Do you know if your first boss has read the book?
I don't know,
You
but
don't
do
know.
I stress about it routinely?
You do, a little bit, eh?
A little bit.
A little bit.
Yes.
Because if she read it and she saw how she was being portrayed in it, what?
It's funny, actually. I think she might come to the end to read how I do, because I do perceive her beyond this, 2D dimension of her being just a tough, rigorous person. She was also a lovely human being outside of work, who I quite liked. And so I think that's very much reflected, and I feel, especially once I left the military, I had a deeper understanding of her behavior being a product of her time and less so something against me.
Sure. Have you seen her since you left?
No.
You haven't?
No,
Do you know where she is?
I do not.
Kind of like to be a fly on the wall if and when you ever bump into her again.
Yeah.
Well, okay, let me raise something kind of awkward here, which is obviously being an ebullient woman in the Canadian Forces, you had men hitting on you all the time. How did you deal with all that?
For the most part, it's water off a duck's back in terms of there is this part where I think a really big argument from some former colleagues about my book has been, oh, well, you kind of knew what you were getting into.
Well, wait, you're 22. I'm not sure you knew what you were getting into.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
I was really young. Sometimes when it was a higher rank, I felt very uncomfortable because what do you do? They're a higher rank. I have to call them sir. So what do I do with that?
Higher rank and 20 years older than you.
Yeah. And so it definitely had its awkward moments. And some people were just genuinely lovely. And you'd turn them down. They'd say, okay, fine. And they took it there. And sometimes I had relationships that, like, a lot of people.
You fess up to that.
Sure do.
You were a bit of a badass in this book, I gotta say.
I own my garbage, that's for sure. Yeah.
Some guy, remind me, some guy emailed you one day and said, out of the blue, like barely knowing you,
yes.
I'm happily married, but kind of looking for, a friend with benefits, and would you be up for this?
Yes, was posted to the unit. At this point, I would have been about 22, 23. He's a captain or major at this point, posted into the unit. I send the welcome email and get one back, basically soliciting a friends with benefits relationship. And I was so concerned at the time with if I offended him with my response of no. That says a lot about that power dynamic and that position that I was being put in. And I wonder who else would have worried about someone else's impact on their career if they said no.
Mm-hmm. He didn't seem all that put off by your rejection, though.
No.
As if he'd kind of done this before,
It seemed like a bit of a pattern, I think. Yeah.
Do you know whether it's... Okay, so you left how many years ago now?
8, as long as I was in. I've been out now.
Okay. Do you know 8 years later, do you suspect 8 years later that it's any better now?
Yes.
It is better?
Yes. Because my husband's still in the military, I still have lots of female military contacts. I have a friend right now, a girlfriend who deployed with my husband, who for a year, they were both in Egypt. She's now deployed to Kuwait, and she is a 30-year-old major, a strong, capable woman who I have seen stand up for herself in a room full of generals, and she takes no prisoners in that regard. And that's change, where when she speaks up, people don't get all their hackles up about it. They say, oh, you're right, that wasn't an inappropriate thing that we said. Is there a long way to go? Absolutely. But I look at even the reception to my book from the military. And years ago, I was writing a blog for Chatelaine, and this is while I was still in, so I got hauled into my boss's office, and was I willing to risk my career for this kind of thing? I was writing about frothy, light subjects. And then now, 9 years later, they're asking me to come speak on the base to talk about what we can change. That's change.
That's
I
progress.
find that exciting, yeah.
That is progress. There's a tightrope you got to walk, I presume, where on the one hand you want to fit in, but on the other hand, you definitely want to see some cultural changes.
Yes.
How do you negotiate that tightrope walk?
Wait till I get out?
Well, there you, okay.
I do. I think I had to wait until I was out. I was really lucky I got to interview a bunch of different women for different articles I've done over the time. And I think you really don't see a lot of books from women who are currently serving because the repercussions have been real for them. I don't know if, just a couple years ago, I spoke to a woman whose military rapist was charged $2,000. What does that mean to her? To see someone charged $2,000, that's nothing. And so, and also money. I mean, what's money? And not even given to her, just fined, basically. So I feel like there's a lot of progress to be made, but I think that's why a lot of currently serving women are silent about it.
Do you think I'm spitballing here. Do you think a possible solution to all of this is just to ensure that men and women are never together on any base or in any mission? Is that an option?
It's so unrealistic. And like I said, I think a big part of inclusivity, of really respecting what other people bring to the table, is going to be a big part of that. I think the problem is women were kind of thrown in and it was, okay, you're equal now, but that's not reality. A lot of these classes and things that go on, although I think they have value, I think we really need more stories from women, because there's a lot to be said for when you hear a story from someone you know or someone who knows that person, you respect them in some capacity, and then you have a deeper understanding and appreciation for their experience. I'm hoping that's what a book like this does.
Did you see your female colleagues more as allies or, I don't know, adversaries, competition, use the word you like?
Didn't have a lot of female friends in the military. In all fairness, they're also few and far between. When you have, at the time, 12%, so you think 1 in 10 are going to be fellow females. and also relationships between officers and non-commissioned members being a little more frowned upon in terms of your personal relationships. And so you don't have a lot to pick from, but definitely thinking about basic training, it was a lot more adversarial in nature. There's that competitiveness, and we're also 18. We're also kind of wanting to be cute for the boys, you know? There's some, or girls, however you may feel. So I feel like there's a bit of that as well. Yeah.
Tell me about the circumstances under which you got injured, which eventually, how many years later, resulted in your dismissal?
7.
7. So you what happened to you?
Broke my leg in basic training, and I kept saying to the course staff, you know, I feel like maybe something's going on, and I finally got to the hospital, and they tell me it's tendonitis, and does not look like, I mean, my leg was huge. So it turned out my tibia was broken, and it's never recovered because I would have marched about another 20 or 30 kilometers on it broken, and then done a week of drill practice on it broken.
So you broke it, and how many days later before you finally made it to the hospital?
I don't actually know when it broke, but it was actually diagnosed as broken not until about 6 weeks later.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. So it just never healed properly. So now I've had a bunch of surgeries, procedures.
How many?
2 surgeries, but I can't count the procedures. I've recently been having my bone marrow sucked from my hip and injected into my leg.
Again, presumably, though, the culture of the military would say, suck it up, kiddo, and just keep going. Is that right?
Yeah, for sure. And to an extent, that has to exist because that's the reality of war sometimes. Basic training isn't war. So if we're breaking people that early on, physically breaking them, I mean, the number of people who had fractures was just through the roof. Mine just so happened to not heal well.
But you're doing a desk job, were you not, at one point?
My whole career was a desk job.
Yeah. So if you got a broken leg, once the leg is fixed, presumably you can stay and continue to do the desk job, can you not?
It's something a lot of people don't realize is as soon as you break the universality of service, which is the policy about all the things as a soldier you're meant to be able to do physically. I couldn't do those. I couldn't kneel, for example, to fire my weapon. So I'm a risk to others at war, and I understood that.
So there's no such thing as just a desk job in the military.
No.
You've got to be able to do it all.
Absolutely.
Which is why they ultimately, they got rid of you, didn't they? I mean,
They sure did. I got medically released.
You got medically released.
Yes.
That's what they call it?
Yes.
Okay. Is that an honorable discharge still?
Oh, yeah,
It is.
absolutely.
Okay.
Yep.
Was that a blessing or a curse as you look back at it?
Oh, a blessing.
Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. I was not cut out for military life. I joke all the time that I hate running and I love lipstick. And it was just not the life for me. I'm also very arty. My degree was in professional writing. Writing was all I ever wanted to do. The military was a detour, but a beautiful one at the same time. So I just don't think it was the life I was meant to lead.
Well, you write very well, I have to say.
Thank you.
I mean, your voice absolutely comes out in the book, and it's
Thank
really,
you.
it's a very, very good read. But there's no part of you that says, this was so not for me, I wish I'd never done it.
No, never.
You would have done it again.
Absolutely. I got something amazing to write about as far as something that maybe has the power to change. I look at the way other women are reaching out to me through this book every single day to say, I was going through that as well, whether they're in the military or not. That's the magic of art, and that's the magic that makes me want to do it every day. And this is what I always wanted. So what a gift to finally be able to do what you love for a living.
If there is another generation of Thompsons that comes after you, I don't mean to scare you, but you know, at some point the question will go through your mind, would I want any offspring of mine to go into the service and be, what, a 5th generation in your
Yes.
family to do it?
Yes.
Okay, have you thought about that?
Absolutely.
And what do you come up with?
The title was meant to be tongue-in-cheek in that a lot of people have said, oh, so you don't think women should be in the military? No, I think we need leaders of all kinds, women especially, who are going through the forces. So the reason I say girls is I think you have to go into the military knowing who you are and very comfortable with that, to be willing to stand up when it doesn't feel right and comfortable to you. That's where I failed myself. And so I think if I had gone in more knowing better who I was and more certain about my reasons for joining, then I would have perhaps felt safer while I was in. And so I would just want my child to do the thing that they felt that they were meant to do. And if that's the way they felt, then I would support them 100%. Because I believe in the military still.
You know, if mom's in the military and dad's in the military, you know, there's a better than 50-50 chance that the kid is one of, you know, some kid someday of yours is going to be in the military.
Art school? No.
Probably not. Yeah, that's something I mean, you have to face the possibility that that's going to happen someday.
Absolutely.
Are you ready for that chat?
Absolutely.
Mom, should I do this?
Yes.
And the answer is still yes.
Everyone must apply.
Is there a part of you that wishes you had seen some, I don't know what you guys in the military call it, action, like in the field?
Yes.
You wish you had experienced that?
Yes and no. I also know I've always been someone who struggled with anxiety. Since I've left the military, I've really struggled with depression as well. I think I would have been someone who would have gone overseas and come home a shell of myself, because my husband deployed for a year recently, and he was in Egypt, and he would talk about even just seeing all the stray animals, and we think of our dog who's wrapped in, warm blankets before he goes to bed. That would have undone me. And so I'm also really realistic with myself about how hard that would have been. I would have gone and I would have done my job, and I think I would have done it well, but then I would have come home and grieved.
Do you suffer from any PTSD to this day?
No, not PTSD, just the depression and anxiety every day, and it's something I'm always really open about. Someone asked me, how do you write about such hard topics? I said, medication and therapy, and I'm not joking. It's what keeps me going.
Good.
Yeah.
Well, I notice it's Kelly S. Thompson on the title of the book.
Yeah.
Is that sort of an homage to Hunter S. Thompson?
I'm not nearly as important. I did joke I'm not also on nearly as many drugs, at least of the illegal variety. It's really trying to find a Kelly Thompson online. Heaven help you.
There's a few of those.
Google is not my friend in that regard.
Gotcha. Well, we are happy to recommend Girls Need Not Apply, Field Notes from the Forces, and we're glad that it's brought Kelly S. Thompson to our studio tonight. Thanks, Kelly.
Thanks for having me.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario. CPA Ontario is a regulator, an educator, a thought leader, and an advocate. We protect the public. We advance our profession. We guide our CPAs. We are CPA Ontario. And by viewers like you. Thank you.